Deputy Daly.
Yeah, thanks, Ceann Corla. I think when we look at the North, in some ways it's a case of everything being different and yet everything maybe in some ways remaining the same. I was in Derry at the weekend at the invitation of a community organisation to deal with issues of justice following on in the anniversary of Bloody Sunday, and I have to say it's been about 28 years since I've been in Derry, and in some ways it was like nothing had changed at all. Big murals with end internment, armoured cars, tanks and guns and all the rest of it alive and well on the streets. And I think we would do well to look back at Bloody Sunday 42 years ago, because people who were involved in that didn't come obviously to get shot. The original march was about internment, a situation where people are incarcerated, have their liberty taken from them without the benefit of a trial, which is an absolute affront to democracy. And that scenario actually radicalised a generation. Now, 42 years on, we have a new power structure, a new administration, but we have to say that internment without trial still exists, where people are ending up in prison, in some instances at the whim of the Northern Ireland Secretary of State. And this is an enormous attack on human rights and civil liberties, but critically, it's an incredibly destabilising issue in the communities and in terms of the peace process. Now, we have had the advantage, I suppose, of being involved in the cross-party group in the Oireachtas, of visiting a number of prisoners in Maghaberry, of meeting the Northern Ireland Minister for Justice, the Northern Ireland Office and other members of that community. But I'd have to say that the cases of the likes of Martin Corey and Marion Price, who had their licences revoked, or in the case of Marion Price being the only person in the history of the universe who had a pardon which was mysteriously lost, that these people have been recently incarcerated without being told the evidence against them, on secret information, with secret hearings being conducted by the parole commissioners, where the legal rights of those people have been absolutely violated, in my opinion, by secret hearings and secret evidence and so on. And I would like to put on the record that I think that this is outrageous. It's an insult to any idea of real justice and transparency, and it is a hugely destabilising issue in Northern Ireland. I mean, we made the point on numerous occasions, had Marion Price's ill health resulted in her condition worsening in prison, you could have had a seriously destabilising effect and a martyr being created in that scenario. I think we also have to recognise that there is a case of somewhat internment by remand, where people are being kept for incredibly long periods of time without hearing the charges against them and without being able to answer for their alleged crimes. Again, this is hugely destabilising. People like Stephen Murney, who've spent 14 months in prison and yet only recently had the charges put to them. And of course, by the time his case came to trial, most of the charges were struck out and not pursued anyway. But already the man had spent a year in prison. Now, this is completely not on. Neither is the situation where we have prisoners who had to embark on a dirty protest for over a year in order to reach an agreement and improvement on prison conditions. And yet they would tell us that many, many months after an agreement was reached, where they would come off the protest, many of the conditions have not been implemented in terms of free association, in terms of a continuation to have very invasive body searches and so on. And I think we have to acknowledge that unless these issues are addressed, they will continue to fuel dissident activity, in my opinion. I think sectarianism and division is alive and well. We have in some ways a sectarian carve-up at the top, but on the ground a lot of issues have not been addressed, and I think nowhere is that more evident than in the issue of housing. And I don't have time to deal with the issues, but it's earlier this week the UN Rapporteur for Housing published a report of her visit to Britain and Northern Ireland, and she highlighted the inequality problem in North Belfast of the situation in terms of housing, which as a result of a sectarian carve-up. They are unwilling to address the issues of substandard housing because housing Catholics in that area might result in a different electoral configuration next time round. So people's human rights, if you like, are being violated. The last point I would make, Ceann Corla, is this is not discrimination is not an exclusively Catholic possession. We've met many Northern Protestants who feel alienated from the Assembly, who feel their issues are not being addressed, and unless their concerns are taken on board in a joint campaign or cooperation, if you like, dealing with civil, political and economic rights, then we won't have a lasting peace and stabilisation that so many people desire.